All right. Well, welcome back from the week where we didn't have a weather to the week we are having weather. So, we just kind of like to change it up that way a little bit. So, since we weren't here last week, I'm having to skip a topic because I had the exact number of topics lined up with our weeks. So I'm giving you both handouts. I'll briefly mention one and then I'll cover the other for our class today. But, like I said, each one of these handouts follows the same kind of outline format. So, and with a suggestion of how to put it in practice. So even though last week's topic we won't cover in depth, you're welcome to try to put that in practice. So, out of these two, one is the spiritual discipline of service, and the other one is of nature, experiencing nature. Since most of us, I think we do and talk about the topic of service well. I don't think that's kind of a new concept for anybody. I'm going to actually choose to focus on the nature one today instead. But briefly, so just remember, a reminder, the overall theme is the idea of spiritual practices, but not just as something one checks off a list, but really in a relational setting, right? It's thus the overarching title, Living God's Love, is these spiritual practices are means or mechanisms or practices that enhance, develop, deepen our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. So we're trying to keep it through that perspective. We've talked about a couple, 2-3 common ones that I think most of us are familiar with. Scripture reading, prayer, or even the topic of service, I think is one that if you grew up in the church, you probably have heard to different degrees. But some of the other ones that I think are a little less on our daily rhythms, I'm trying to highlight those. And a point I've made in the beginning of the series, and one I want to throw out from time to time or remind you from time to time, is the expression, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There are some of these practices that have been used by other groups, perhaps abused by other groups, and because we don't want to take it to the extent or the application that other groups have, I think unfortunately we have often thrown that out, like thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and we have not contemplated some of these practices, or maybe have smirked at them or avoided them or just felt uncomfortable with them. But I assure you, as we are looking through each one of these, finds its meaning and example in Scripture. We're not just pulling this out of nothing. And so, once again, just a reminder of that important point. So, service. We'll just briefly touch on that. Jesus is the example of service, right? Jesus is who we are modeling in service. Service is not thought of as something most people aspire to. I just can't wait to grow up and be a servant, right? It's not really a category that we think of success. It's not a particular way of being that we associate with status and power. Quite the opposite. We even think of like service as something down low with people with low skill sets or low education. We even might think of like quote unquote the help kind of mindset. Well, that's unfortunate because Jesus seemed to think there was great power in the concept of serving, that it was liberating, that it was transformative, that it was in line with what God wants for his people. To be servant-minded, to be servant in our way of treating one another. Remember, these practices are about our relationship with God, but really also our relationship with each other. And the concept of service is transformative. Paul mentions Jesus as the example, right, in chapter 2 of Philippians, like how very Jesus, who though had the power, had the authority, and I think if I can even use a buzzword in our social justice topics out there, had the privilege, he actually took all that to the benefit of others. He didn't use it to elevate himself. He didn't use it to, go up the ladder there. He used it to better other people's lives and realities and self-esteem and all the power, all that he was and had and was given by God, he used for others through service. And I think that's profound, right? That is what we're to do. And so even Paul, in thinking of Jesus, quotes the whole, it's blessed, more blessed to give than to receive, which is right in tune. We don't have Jesus saying that from his own lips, but we trust, of course, the inspiration. And Paul to be quoting Jesus with that, which fits with Jesus' life. Right, that Jesus found, once again, great freedom and great power in using what he had and was to the benefit of others. In one of the conversations, especially in Mark's account, one of the 3 times in Mark's account that Jesus talks about coming to die for the benefit of humanity, the very next story is one of the disciples acting completely like in opposite way to that concept, right? And one of those, Jesus, in correcting them, says, "Hey, you want to be first? You want to be top? You want to lead? Tell you what, you just go get in the back, right? You go take the back of the line. You go be servant of all. You just use that drive to be on top, but the way to get you on top of this worldview is by elevating others. That's how you go to the top. And so Jesus is putting kind of that concept of status and power on its head with that concept, or with that teaching. So, and then I give you some ideas, like be generous with your time and maybe go volunteer somewhere, be mindful of the needs of our own here at church. If you can't think of anybody in need, go talk to any one of the elders or staff, and they'll let you know there's need. There's needs in your community. There's needs in your own family, extended family. So take the time to do that. Any thoughts or questions? Once again, super summarized. But I didn't just want that completely go pass us by. And then, you got the handout to go deeper on some verses there. Good? Right. We're not done with today's lesson, right? That's just the summary. Okay, so nature. That's the one I want to spend a little more time with. Nature. Genesis 1 and 2 makes a lot of amazing foundational points and themes, and really sets the stage for the rest of the storyline. But one of the things that's very important from that story is that creation is saying something about the Creator. The creation story of Genesis 1 and 2 was in direct communication and conversation with the creation stories of its time, of its day. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, and the other leading powers of that world. And all those creation stories said something about the creators, right? And it said something about that particular people group. And so this creation story is doing the same, in the sense of, as you read through it, what is it saying about God? Interesting that in Genesis 1 and 2, where it says there, chapter 1 and 2, verse 1 and 2, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That word God, which is in English translated capital G, is actually a generic word for spiritual being, Elohim. And so what I think the author is doing there is, in the beginning, a spiritual being created the heavens and the earth. And in the world where there were plenty of creation stories by many different gods, I think the ancient reader would have been like, yeah, which spiritual being is this? And then you got to read the rest of the story to be like, which spiritual being is this talking about? And then later it's God introduced himself as Yahweh, so then you get more specific. But I think it's by design saying, in a world of gods, quote unquote, lowercase g, real or imagined, all claiming to be, the coolest god around, what does creation actually say about this God, right? And what does it say? I've talked about Genesis plenty. What does the story of Genesis 1 and 2 say about God? Okay, so first of all, must be a powerful God, right? He just speaks. Really cool. 10 times, 10 utterances of God bring creation into existence, pushes chaos out and life. So that theme of 10 repeats. Can you think of a few other places where there's the number 10? 10 plagues, 10 commandments, that number is intentional. What else? Powerful God. What else does it say? Yeah, God who is about love. How do we know this? Does the storyline have any violence? Any brutality? Anybody lose their head? Any love spat? Any gods competing for some goddess? Any, cosmic battles? No, it's a God who creates humanity to be relational. So it's a God that is community, is love, it's interactive. What else? What does it repeat like at the end of each day of creation? Good. So this God must be good, because he's creating good stuff. Like he's landscaping chaos into a place that is good. It's a God of beauty, of creativity, of harmony, of peace, of relational interaction. It's a God who is very presence transformative. Chaos into beauty, right? It's a God who is about delightfulness, which is literally what Eden means. So all those things are saying something of God. It's a God that is organized, that's in charge, that is intentional, that is purposeful, that is proactive, that is, on and on we could go. So creation says something about the Creator, right? Psalm 19:1 makes that very point. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And then you just read throughout the Psalms, it's declaring something of God, the heavens and the earth, the creation story. Psalm 104 talks about that. Let's go to 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 16. Verse 31 to 33. Let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad. Let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Let the sea resound and all that is in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Let the trees of the forest sing. Let them sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. Okay, according to this little poem here, what is creation singing and proclaiming? What about God are they singing?
The Lord reigns.
The reign of God, right? Yahweh reigns. This God is a God who is in charge. He is, and not just, this isn't just, the song isn't just to Israel, it is to the nations. You think you're ruling your own world with your own gods and your own creation stories, and you know your own representatives of those gods, the Pharaoh and the king and the whatever. Yahweh reigns. In creation makes that point. One of the concepts being deconstructed in the plagues is who's in charge. The illusion is Egypt's in charge. Well, because geopolitically they were the nation in charge. And they had the army, they had the power, they had the buildings, they had the infrastructure, they had, the very powerful looking Pharaoh who represented the mighty gods of Egypt. Actually, who's in charge? Yahweh. And so Yahweh starts to hit each one of the socioeconomic structures of their world. It starts. Some of those plagues attacked the idea of their religion, like even the sun, who was a symbol of their top god. Who's really in charge of all that? Yahweh. And so to the nations let it be sung that the point that creation is making, Yahweh's in charge. Also, one of the intended ripple effects of the plagues was to show the neighboring nations that the God of the slaves is in charge. Because then they were going to be freed from Egypt and have to go interact with those nations. And it's supposed to be a warning to them. Whatever gods you think you have, Yahweh's in charge. So you might want to act accordingly. Right? And creation is meant to make that point. Let's go to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. Verse 18 to 21. So here in Romans, Paul is writing to handful of house churches, mostly comprised of a mix of folks, Jews and Gentiles. The churches in Rome were composed of Gentiles and Jews, and then trying to remember which Roman emperor was that actually told all Jews, you must leave. We're fed up with you, go. And so they had to leave Rome. And so they left. About 7 years into that, they were allowed to return to then find the churches that had grown for the last 7 years without them. And now they have to kind of come back into that. And it's like cross-cultural conflict now. There's some cross-cultural shock through reintegrating. And there was some tension with all that, right? And so Paul's going to write to that setting. And one of the points he's going to make early here is that both Jews and Gentiles have the same problem. The same problem. Sin. The same problem. Now, they got to that problem differently. So to the Jews, Paul says, you had a special relationship with God. God called you. God nurtured you. God, matured you from infancy to a nation. God gave you laws. God gave you his presence. God gave you priests. And guess what you still did? You sinned. To the Gentiles, God gave creation. Yes. So let's read it. Chapter 1, verse 18. To 21. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. And he's talking about the Gentiles. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now, does that mean they understand all the morality that God expects, or that they get, Jesus is coming or came and that they need to be back? No. But it makes it crystal clear that God exists. That God exists, that he's powerful, and you can actually learn some qualities of God. That's the point I made about Genesis 1 and 2, based on creation. Nobody's without excuse on that. And so creation is it's an experiential way to know God, or at least something of God, or a layer of God. It's a
Get you headed in the right direction.
yes, and at least God's greatness, his power, his in chargeness, is that a thing? His reign. Some make up words here. His awesomeness, like his beauty, his purposefulness, like his design, yeah, the detailed of like the mechanics, how integrated, how harmonious God is, right, through his design. So nature has that. Let's go to Job 12. Job chapter 12, 7 through 10. So here's this is Job speaking. If you remember the basic storyline of Job, Job is an amazing man, the greatest of all of the people of the East. Ooh, by the way, he's from the land of Uz, or Uz, or Uzi, I don't know, like however you say that. Oz, perhaps. Being the O is silent, I don't know. So here's what that means. He's not a Jew. He's not an Israelite. He's not a Hebrew. He's a Gentile. Yet he's very in tune with the existence of God. And not just like aware of God, he's all about God. And to whatever knowledge he has of God, he's very intentional and committed to God. And thus the greatest of those people, because he is about Yahweh, the Lord that reigns, or the God that reigns. Okay, so his life is like beautiful. He's super rich. He's got a bazillion donkeys, which I guess was a sign of being rich then. He's got donkeys and camels and goats and whatever, and then he's got a huge family, which was a sign of blessings back then. It's well known, well liked. It's awesome. Okay. Then all of a sudden, his life crumbles. Not like there was a turn in the stock market of donkeys, and it just kind of plummeted, and he had to sell them, and some got repoed, or it all was taken away. His children, his livelihood, his money, his status, his possession, his comfort, his sense of like, yeah, God's good, is all in charge, and it's beautiful. The ancient reader would have been like, wow, he must have really angered the gods, kind of idea, because it was that intentional. Well, so then his friends show up with good intentions, as friends mostly have. They show up to be kind and encouraging and supportive, to the degree that they are just overwhelmed by even seeing him. Right? His pain and suffering is so intense that they just break down, and they outwardly express the grief that they see in their friend. Right? They start to tear their clothes and throw ashes on themselves and that kind of thing. So then they're just so overwhelmed that they're in silence for like a week kind of time. Like there's no discussion about what's going on. I don't know if it meant they said nothing, but there's no attempt to make sense of that world or of that moment. Until Job opens his mouth in chapter 3 and says some very, just like right out of the gate, he says some very like intense things about God, some nuance, some implications. And so the friends then start to go back and forth, try to make sense of what's happening to Job. And the bottom line, the bottom premise of his friends are, Job, you're obviously being punished. Why don't you just come as we stand and sing? And then you will repent, your life will be better, all will surround themselves against you, and we will hold hands and sing kumbaya, and the Lord will bless you and keep you. Ooh, we'll sing the Lord will bless you and keep you, right? Like it's just... And Job's like, yes, that's a thing, but that's not really what's happening with me. And in that back and forth, we have these words as one of his responses to his friends. So chapter 12, verse 7 to 10. But ask the animals, they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? And his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all humanity. Now, to put in context, he's saying, God's doing this thing to me. But if you put that aside, he's saying that God's in charge of everything, that God is the creator, that God is the ruler, that God is the judge, that God is the source of life. And you could just ask your pet fluffy dog who's in charge. And if it could talk to you, it would say Yahweh. Or your parakeet. I don't know. You got a parakeet? I don't know, a little parakeet. Like, creation is saying that. Just not. If your parakeet starts talking to you, you really need to go see somebody. But that's what creation is saying. God reigns. We already saw that in one of the Psalms. And that's the point Job is making. And he's like sarcastic about it. Yeah, duh. Who doesn't know that? Well, apparently a whole lot of humanity doesn't, but he's making the point that we should. Because creation is about the reign of God. And so he says here that it will teach you, right? And besides the idea of the reign of God, if creation is teaching us something about God, and I started with this question, but I think it's worth posing again, what is creation saying about God? He reigns. He's in charge. He gives life. He's about purpose. He's about design. He's about intentionality. He's about, on and on and on we go. So if that's true, if we take the time to sit and experience nature, and we are open to learning what it's teaching us, then it's worth the practice. Do you see where I'm connecting all this? Like, why is this a spiritual practice? Because it's a teaching moment. It's an opportunity to go to school about God. And if you're not a huge fan of professors, teachers lecturing you, go to the school of nature. The birds will teach you. The sky will teach you. The lovely sunsets will teach you. The squirrels, they're teaching you something about God. So I'm teaching at OC Faith in the Problem of Suffering class, and I'm including actually this series here as I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm including this as an every Friday we talk about one spiritual practice. And the way I think that's relevant, besides the fact that it's just one way for you to develop your faith, is as you think of pain and suffering, these practices here are really, in a relational way, connecting you with God. That's really about helping you cope through the horrible mess that we call life. So then all these little homeworks that I'm encouraging you to do, they have to do it, right? Like there's a grade. If they want a grade and if they want to go into heaven, they have to do it. So, and then they have to like submit a little reflection post and talk about how did you feel and how did you experience. And nature was one of them. I timed it with us talking about Genesis. Like when I was planning out my calendar, I thought, man, this is going to be a good fit right with Genesis, which happened to be the same week we had this storm and ice and pellets and the winter storm 1, 2, 3, however we called it. And so that was kind of a bummer. People couldn't go on walks on the beach, or sit there and bask in the sun. So it was interesting to read what people did and their experience. And one person, they were supposed to at least write a couple solid paragraphs. One student in particular spent the first paragraph talking about how bad my timing was. And then the second paragraph saying, but nonetheless, I just sat out there in the snow. And then they really just had this great experience. One kid actually went to a park, especially still in the cold, and sat there. And I think you're supposed to do it for at least 30 minutes. And so he's like, this is going to be forever. And so he's looking at his phone and he's like, okay, surely we're almost down, it's almost over. And he looks, it's only been 6 minutes. So he finally is like, I'm going to put my phone down. Like he's telling me all this, right, on the little post. And then he said, this is boring, it's cold, and there's just dead trees, And then all of a sudden he said, I heard some rustling in the leaves, and then I thought, I'm going to die here. And then it just turned out to be a squirrel. And then he started observing that squirrel, and then there's another squirrel, and then there's some birds flying. And he said he just started to, there's stuff happening here.
That was the hypothermia.
Yeah, it might have been there. Then he started to lose. He was hallucinating. He was in and out of consciousness. Long story short, he said he spent an hour there. When he actually looked back at his phone, he's like, it'd been an hour. And he did not die because he had to write the post. And so it was just fascinating to see people, one talked about the sunrise and the sunset, some other things. So John chapter 1 to 5. John's account, right? John uses language to connect the reader with Genesis. Like in the beginning, he wants the reader to be like, oh wait, sounds like Genesis. Because he's intentionally trying to do that, especially because he's writing later than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So why just say the same things, right? I don't need to start talking about and Mary, the mother of Jesus. I don't need to talk about his genealogy. That's already been done. So he just begins in the beginning. And he kind of goes back and forth with some language to say Jesus is the presence of God in the beginning. Jesus was there. He's the action of God in creation. And so in reality, as you experience Jesus, you're experiencing God. And as you experience creation, you are experiencing the life giver who also is Jesus. So he's just connecting it all. And then he says, Jesus came to make God known, and through him we get to connect with all that. So you and I can in a very experiential kind of way and in a relational way, connect with Jesus, God, and nature, because it's all an expression of God. So with that in mind, you could read Psalm 95, which we won't take the time to do it here, but there's many different verses and places in the Bible that use nature to describe the glory of God. Right? Psalm 95 is even a song we sing out of the first few verses there. So, as an assignment, or here's a recommendation, right? They get the assignment, is this next week, try to find a moment, a quiet place, go for a walk in the park, sit at a tree, watch the sunset, sit in, even you can sit inside and look out as it's raining. Just try to be in that moment and ask yourself, what is this saying about God? What is it teaching me? Remember, it's supposed to be teaching you. What is it teaching you? And it's fascinating that there's even research about how to be in touch with nature calms you and has psychological benefits, and it helps your body be all more in tune and a bunch of other things, which it should, because you're experiencing something of God. Not a angry God, not a vengeful God, not a petty and cruel God, but a God of beauty and purpose and harmony and peace and intentionality. Thoughts as we about to ring a bell here?
The next level and take a hike with your shoes off and then you're earthing.
There you go. If you want to be all hippie, you can really go into that.
This is like what Aaron Rodgers is doing. He's going to spend 4 days in a dark room.
There you go. And even if you want to put 2-3 things together, you can sit out there and you can breathe. Remember, we talked about some of that. You can just read a Psalm 95 as you then experience that. It really has a calming, centering, connecting with God experience. So take the time to notice nature. All right, next time, what are we talking about next time? We're going to talk about confession. We're going to talk about confession. We're going to have a little confession booth here. We're going to have Priest Tim will be available following the class. But no, come and we'll see what that's all about. Appreciate your time. Go and be in nature.
Go sit out in the snow.
Yeah, go sit out in the snow tonight. That's right.